Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Naomi Johnson was barely 16 when she realized that the house she lived in wasn't a home, but a prison in disguise. Every room exuded the authority of Richard Harrison, her adoptive father. The walls were spotless, the furnishings luxurious, but everything smacked of judgment, control, and humiliation. Richard, a white man in his 50s, adored order and power. But behind his supposedly fatherly smile lurked a moral predator. He saw Naomi not as his daughter, but as a subject to be degraded, a being to be molded according to his prejudices. And because she was black, he treated her with subtle but constant cruelty, exploiting every opportunity to remind her that she didn't really belong to him and that she was, in his opinion, inferior. Mealtimes were a trial. Naomi had to sit upright, head bowed, while Richard criticized her eating habits, posture, complexion, and hairstyle. The guests were often unwitting accomplices. Richard liked to humiliate his daughter in front of them, to demonstrate his power and cultivate an image of a strict but respectable man. Yet beneath the hurt and humiliation, Naomi held on to something Richard could never take from her, her quiet dignity. She knew her worth didn't depend on her adoptive father's cruel words. And somewhere in her heart, a flame was ignited, the flame of subtle revenge, of a day when she might rise again, not through hatred, but through strength and success. That night, as she fell asleep alone in her room with its perfect but cold walls, Naomi made a promise to herself: one day, they will all know who I really am. And that promise would change his life forever. Mornings always began the same way for Naomi Johnson. In the spotless kitchen of the Harrison house, Richard Harrison, her adoptive father, was already waiting for her with his stern expression. "Naomi, have you put on what you dare call clothes?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. His voice was outwardly gentle, but every word carried the edge of contempt. Naomi looked down, clutching her hands to her chest. She knew no apology would be enough. Her clothes, carefully chosen to hide her adolescent body, still seemed inadequate in Richard's eyes. "That sweater, it doesn't go with your skin tone at all. And those shoes," he continued, examining his feet critically. "You look like you're trying to attract attention for the wrong reasons." At school, Richard's comments followed her like a shadow. Her classmates, always quick to mimic adult criticism, mocked her for her appearance and skin color. Naomi felt the weight of others' gaze on her, but deep down, a small voice inside her kept telling her she was worth more than that. Every chore Richard imposed on her around the house was designed to humiliate her. She had to clean the windows until they sparkled, polish the furniture endlessly, and wash the dishes with almost obsessive precision. If anything wasn't perfect, he noticed immediately. And often, his criticisms were accompanied by comments about her skin color, implying that she could never measure up. Yet, despite the fear and pain, Naomi cultivated a secret space within herself. A place where she could be free of her thoughts, where she wrote in her journal every humiliation, every injustice, but also every small inner victory. She knew that these words, these memories, were her silent allies. This chapter of her life seemed endless, a succession of gray days punctuated by humiliations. But for Naomi, each trial strengthened her resilience. She understood that true strength came not from the perfect house, the expensive clothes, or Richard's authority, but from her ability to maintain dignity despite everything. And, deep in her heart, she began to glimpse a future where she would never again be at the mercy of someone like him. A future where revenge would not be a mere retort, but a silent demonstration of her greatness and worth. That morning, Naomi entered the living room with a mixture of fear and resignation. Richard, as usual, was waiting for her with a cold smile, ready to turn every gesture into criticism. "Naomi, you know I already told you not to hang around those." He hesitated for a moment, searching for the words that would hurt the most. "Poor excuses for friends. They'll never raise you up." Naomi felt anger boiling inside her, but she suppressed it. She knew that any visible reaction would only worsen her plight. So she silently turned away and went upstairs to her room. There she opened her secret journal, that sanctuary where she could be honest with herself. She wrote everything: Richard's words, the humiliations she suffered at school, the contemptuous looks of the house guests. Each word was a liberation, each sentence a reminder of her own worth. Rereading the final pages, Naomi realized something crucial. Her adoptive father didn't just hate her as a teenager, he judged her for her skin color. The humiliations weren't just personal, they were racial. He saw her blackness as a flaw, as something to be controlled or demeaned. This revelation brought forth a strange mixture of sadness and determination. She understood that her fight would not only be against Richard, but against prejudices deeply rooted in society and even in those who claimed to love her. At school, Naomi began to see the world differently. She saw the injustices around her, the judgmental looks directed at her black classmates, the whispers and mockery that no one else seemed to notice. Every humiliation she had suffered at home took on a larger meaning. She was not alone, and her pain was not unique. Naomi made a silent decision: she would turn every humiliation into strength. Every cruel word from Richard, every unfair criticism, every school mockery would become a rock upon which she would build her own greatness. That evening, as she wrote by the light of her desk lamp, she noted in her journal, "One day, I won't be the one they put down. I'll be the one they respect, the one they listen to. And they'll all understand, including you, Richard, that they tried to extinguish me, but they could never extinguish my light." And for the first time in a long time, Naomi smiled. Not a smile of joy, but a smile of silent promise, that of a young girl who was beginning to understand the power she held within herself. In the silence of her room, Naomi closed her eyes and let her memories transport her elsewhere. Before arriving at the Harrisons' house, her life had been different, albeit marked by hardship. Her biological mother, a gentle and courageous black woman, had raised her with love and pride, instilling in her from an early age that she was of inestimable value. Naomi remembered afternoons spent running around the small garden behind their house, the heartfelt laughter that echoed through the poverty, and the bedtime stories full of magic and dreams. These memories were now buried, like a secret treasure she had to protect in her heart, away from Richard and his incessant criticism. But adoption had changed all that. Richard Harrison saw her only as a body and a skin color to be controlled. Hugs, encouragement, and kind words were rare, almost non-existent. Naomi remembered that very day when he had compared her skin to an obstacle to be overcome, an imperfection to be corrected through discipline and criticism. That day, she had understood that love could be conditional and cruel. Yet, amidst this pain, Naomi drew on her childhood memories for the strength to remain herself. She remembered her biological mother's words, "Your color is your strength, Naomi. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." These words became her invisible shield, protecting her from Richard's verbal attacks. Every night, she added fragments of her old life to her diary, the happy memories, but also the wounds inflicted by her adoptive father. These pages became a map of her identity, a guide to never lose herself in humiliation and pain. And as she lay in bed, Naomi felt for the first time a spark of quiet rebellion. Not a loud rebellion, but a firm determination. She would never allow her past to be erased by Richard's hatred and racism. One day, she would show that she was much more than he had tried to make her believe. She closed her eyes, whispering, "I will never be what you want me to be, Richard. I will be better than you, and that will be my silent victory." This inner promise sealed her destiny. Naomi, though young and vulnerable, was beginning to build the foundations of her future, a future in which she would reclaim everything Richard had tried to steal from her, her dignity, her voice, and her power to shine despite everything. On Saturday evening, the Harrison house was filled with guests, Richard's friends, business colleagues, all familiar but intimidating faces. Naomi entered the living room, wearing a simple dress she had carefully chosen. She hoped to go unnoticed, avoid criticism, and maintain a semblance of dignity. But Richard, true to form, had no intention of leaving her alone. "Naomi," he called, his tone ostensibly calm, but each syllable a blow. "That dress, really? Do you want us to make fun of you in front of our guests?" The muffled laughter of the guests echoed like a cruel echo. Naomi felt her face burn with shame. She looked down, trying to blend in. "And your hair?" Richard continued. always unruly. It seems like you never take care of yourself. At that moment, something inside her snapped. The daily humiliations, the incessant criticism, the subtly slipped-in racial remarks from years ago, all of it culminated in a mixture of anger, sadness, and determination. Naomi took a deep breath and stood, staring up at her adoptive father. "You know what, Richard," she said, her voice trembling but still firm. "I'm tired of trying to live up to your ridiculous standards. Maybe I'm not what you want, but I am exactly what I am. And one day, you'll see that you could never break me." An icy silence fell over the room. The guests, surprised by Naomi's tone, exchanged embarrassed glances. Richard, furious, flushed with anger. But Naomi, for the first time in years, felt an inner power that no cruel words could erase. That night, in her room, Naomi wrote at length in her journal. She detailed every humiliation, every injustice, and, for the first time, she outlined a plan for survival, for success, and, one day, for revenge. Not revenge through physical vengeance, but through life itself. She vowed to transform her pain into strength, her tears into determination, and every criticism into motivation to build her future. She ended her note with these words. "Today, I'm no longer the girl he can humiliate. I'm Naomi Johnson. And one day, everyone will know who I really am." This was the breaking point. Naomi realized her life no longer belonged to Richard. The battle wasn't over, but she had just regained control of her destiny. On the morning of her 18th birthday, Naomi packed her suitcase in silence. Each item she put in her bag represented a piece of her old life, some good, some painful. She knew that leaving the Harrison house meant turning the page on years of humiliation, but also facing an unfamiliar world, without a safety net. Richard, true to himself, tried one last manipulation. "Where do you think you're going, Naomi?" he said in a mock-worried tone. "You don't know anything about the real world. You're not ready." Naomi turned around calmly. For the first time, she felt neither fear nor guilt. "I'm ready," she replied. "Ready to be myself, to build my life, and to never let someone define me again." The drive to her student apartment was filled with memories. Every street corner, every sign, reminded her of the times she'd been belittled, judged, and humiliated. But instead of feeling crushed by these memories, Naomi turned them into fuel for her ambition. Every injustice she suffered became a step toward her own success. At university, Naomi immediately threw herself into her studies, choosing law, fascinated by justice and the opportunity to defend those oppressed by society. Her days were long and exhausting, but every success, every compliment received from her teachers and classmates, was a victory over her past. In the evenings, in her small, modest but warm apartment, Naomi opened her journal and reread the humiliations of the past. Each word became a lesson, each memory a motivation to continue. She knew her road would be long, but for the first time, she felt she was in control. One evening, as she looked out over the city from her apartment window, Naomi whispered, "I'm no longer the one he can destroy. Every step I take brings me closer to the life I deserve. And one day, they'll all see what I've become." This decision marked the beginning of her rise. Naomi was no longer a victim. She was becoming a silent force, determined to transform her wounds into power and write her own story. As the years passed, Naomi Johnson was no longer the shy young girl humiliated by Richard Harrison. At university, she had established herself as a brilliant and determined student. Every morning, she woke with a clear goal: to excel in her law studies and to defend those marginalized by society. Her teachers quickly noticed her intelligence and perseverance. Naomi not only had an exceptional memory, she also possessed a rare ability to understand the subtleties of injustice and formulate powerful arguments. Her classmates respected her, some even admired her, unaware of her painful past. At the same time, Naomi continued to write in her journal. She recorded all the injustices she observed, the cases of racism or discrimination she heard about, as well as her strategies for transforming her pain into strength. Her personal experiences became a guide for advocating for others and understanding the legal system from all angles. With every internship and project she took on, Naomi moved closer to her goal, to become a civil rights lawyer. She wanted to fight for those who, like her once, were victims of prejudice and cruelty. Her resilience transformed into competence, her painful past into an invisible but powerful weapon. One evening, while reviewing landmark cases of racial justice and inequality, Naomi realized she had changed. She was no longer just a survivor, she was an emerging force in a world that had never made her life easy. Every humiliation she suffered in the Harrison household had been a lesson, every criticism a silent motivator. She noted in her journal, "I have become stronger than my wounds. My past doesn't define me, but it has prepared me to shine where so many others would fail. And one day, Richard, you will see that I have transformed everything you thought would break me into my greatest strength." As Naomi rose in her academic and professional careers, one thing became clear: her future would never be dictated by her adoptive father's cruelty. And every step she took brought her closer to the day when she could finally confront her past, not through revenge, but through a shining demonstration of her achievement and dignity. While Naomi was purposefully building her life and career, Richard Harrison's world was beginning to crumble. His once thriving business was spiraling into chaos. Poorly calculated investments, unreliable partners, and a combination of vanity and arrogance had ruined his reputation. The same social circles that had once adored him now looked the other way or whispered behind his back. Richard didn't understand what was happening to him. In his vision, everything was supposed to obey him: money, power, respect. But life, relentless, was beginning to show him that his domination of Naomi had been his only tangible achievement, and even that had eluded him. Naomi, on the other hand, had completed her law school and begun her career as a civil rights lawyer. Every case she won, every client she defended against injustice, was a silent victory over the past. She knew that her success wasn't just personal, it was a response to all the humiliations she had suffered. This chapter of her life placed her in an unexpected position of power. Richard, once intimidating and domineering, was a shadow of his former self. Naomi shone in the media, in the courts, and in the hearts of those she helped. Every success she achieved was a silent lesson: true power lies not in cruelty or domination, but in resilience, competence, and dignity. When a former associate of Richard's mentioned Naomi at a business meeting, Richard felt a mixture of disbelief and rage. "This girl," he muttered, "how can she be so perfect?" But Naomi needed no overt revenge. Her mere existence, her resounding success, was more than enough to confront him with his mistakes. One evening, Naomi wrote in her journal, "I never sought to destroy him. But the world has its own way of delivering justice. And I am proof that dignity and perseverance are stronger than humiliation and hatred." She smiled, knowing that the real affront would not be an immediate confrontation, but the inevitable moment when Richard would be confronted with reality. Naomi had outgrown everything he had tried to control or destroy. Years after his departure, Naomi Johnson walked into the lobby of a prestigious law firm where a crucial meeting was about to take place. The spotlight wasn't on her, but she knew this moment would be decisive. Among the attendees was Richard Harrison, now aging, scarred by time and accumulated failures. Richard hadn't recognized her at first. The young girl he had once humiliated had become a confident, elegant, and, above all, powerful woman in her field. When he first laid eyes on her and heard her name called during the introduction, he felt a chill run down his spine. "Naomi Johnson," he stammered, unable to hide his surprise. She nodded, calm as she was, and stepped forward to speak. Every step she took was a silent affirmation of her newfound strength. In the room, partners and clients listened attentively. Naomi presented her argument precisely, demonstrating not only her professional competence but also her complete command of the situation. Richard, once dominant, was reduced to a humiliated spectator, unable to contradict her successes. Throughout the meeting, Naomi remained polite, respectful, and impeccable. She didn't need to shout or humiliate to demonstrate her power. Her success, presence, and confidence were enough to turn the tables, the once cruel adoptive father was now eclipsed by the daughter he had tried to destroy. At the end of the meeting, Naomi extended her hand to seal the deal. Richard, bewildered, simply accepted, knowing that his only place in this scenario was as a helpless spectator. This confrontation was not accompanied by overt revenge. Naomi had long understood that true power lies not in humiliation or control, but in dignity, competence, and resilience. She had taken control of her past not through anger, but through success, and every glance in that room reminded her of this. That evening, as she left the building, Naomi thought of her journal, of all those pages where she had recorded her humiliations and her silent plans. She knew that the moment of her true victory was approaching. The whole world would see, sooner or later, what Richard had tried to suppress for years. A few months after their face-off at the firm, Naomi Johnson accepted an invitation to speak at a major conference on racism and domestic abuse. The room was packed with journalists, activists, and influential figures. Naomi knew it was the perfect time to share her story, not out of revenge, but to enlighten others and inspire those who had been shamed or marginalized. As she took the stage, a respectful silence fell. Naomi took a deep breath and began to recount her journey, from the daily humiliations inflicted by Richard Harrison to her years of resilience, study, and professional success. She spoke honestly and calmly, detailing the subtle but constant abuse, the racial criticism, and the moments when she was belittled and isolated. Every word resonated in the room, deeply touching the audience. Naomi wasn't trying to publicly destroy Richard, but to show the reality of the invisible wounds so many children and young adults suffer. At one point, she mentioned her adoptive father, without naming him directly. There are people who believe that cruelty can break a person. But every humiliation, every injustice, can be transformed into strength if we refuse to let these acts define who we are. Journalists took note of every word, and social media quickly ignited. People began to speak of Naomi Johnson not only as a talented lawyer, but as a powerful voice against racism and domestic abuse. Richard, observing the media coverage, realized with horror that the girl he had once humiliated had become a respected and influential public figure. This chapter marked Naomi's moral triumph. She had chosen to respond not with personal vengeance, but with truth and social justice. Her success, her voice, and her courage were living proof that no one could crush the human soul when it was guided by dignity and determination. As she returned home that evening, Naomi wrote in her journal, "Today, I have not only won against my past. I have given a voice to those who had none. And the world now knows that dignity and perseverance are invincible." She smiled, knowing that the greatest victory was not against Richard, but against injustice and hatred themselves. Years after leaving the Harrison household, Naomi Johnson had become an accomplished woman. A respected lawyer, influential speaker, and civil rights activist, she now carried her voice beyond the courtrooms and boardrooms. Every professional success, every life she helped transform, was a silent tribute to her own resilience. Richard Harrison, on the other hand, lived in the shadow of his past. His failed business ventures and tarnished reputation were a constant reminder of the reality that cruelty and racism never lead to true power. Naomi, on the other hand, was living proof that a person can rise above humiliation and injustice. One day, during a television interview, Naomi was asked about her journey and how she overcame her painful past. She answered calmly and confidently, "True victory is not measured by revenge or power over others. It is measured by the strength to remain oneself, the ability to transform pain into motivation, and the dignity with which one moves forward despite everything." Her words resonated across the country. Thousands of people who had experienced discrimination, abuse, or humiliation found in Naomi a role model. She had proven that resilience and success could be more powerful weapons than anger or hatred. Richard, now an isolated and forgotten man, could only watch from a distance. The girl he had humiliated and belittled had become a light no one could extinguish. Naomi, however, held no resentment. She had transformed her pain into power, and that power now lit up the world around her. As she closed her journal that evening, Naomi wrote one last note about her past. "The wounds we carry can become the stones upon which we build our greatness. I chose to walk with dignity, and today, I am free. Free from fear, free from hate, free to be myself. And in the quiet of her home, surrounded by memories of her victories and achievements, Naomi smiled for the first time without ulterior motive. She had won not against a person, but against the forces of injustice and humiliation. She had found peace, recognition of her own worth, and the certainty that her light could never be extinguished.